Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that the lunch that you've had has not been so heavy that you are going to sleep in this session. We'll do our best to keep this not as a panel discussion but as a conversation. And the conversation is really between leaders in education. All the panelists here have varied and deep experience. And I hope that this diversity of experience and background will surface different perspectives and lead to an engaging conversation on the panel. And also, we will leave enough time so that if there are any questions, we can have a conversation with you as well. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to start with Smita. Smita focuses on budget private schools. She's the co-founder and co-leader of Lead Group, and has more than 2 decades of experience in transforming schools through innovative pedagogy and technology. She left a thriving corporate career in Singapore to tackle the challenges of India's school system. Today, Smita's work impacts over 3.5 million students across 8,000 schools, making her a leading voice in education reform. All of you know that India has a large number of affordable private schools, and for many parents, affordable private schools are preferred over the government school system. So Smita, the first question to you: what regulations enable good learning outcomes in budget private schools? Which ones hinder innovation in the delivery of quality school education? And I'd like you to share examples of both enabling and hindering.
Thanks, Anjali. I think it'll be good to have some context of the landscape. Quickly, India has 1.5 million schools. 1 million are government schools, the other 500,000 are private schools, different fee ranges. But yeah, and these schools serve 270 million children. Half of them go to government schools and half of them go to private schools. So I think one important context is that in India, any regulation has to enable both ecosystems, because there is no way we can educate our population only through one channel. Public school systems and private school systems are equally important. I think with that context, I would say that NEP and NCF recently, which came out, is by far the most enabling regulation that has come in. For the longest time, and this used to be my peeve when I moved also from Singapore to India, that a lot of the conversation in education was about input metrics. What should be the size of the classroom, the acreage in which the school building stands, are there enough toilets? And we were all just talking about these basic infrastructure inputs. I think NEP and NCF specifically acknowledge that outcomes are important, that we are not doing very well on student outcomes, and we want to change the goalpost from rote learning to high quality competence building. It starts talking about what all needs to be done. And there are like a bunch of things there. So I think it is by far the most enabling one. And as a school partner, I find that the conversation has shifted. Sometimes the conversations with school owners was, what's the need? Things are going fine. Parents want children to write 1,000 times, let's do that. But that conversation has shifted, because now the conversation is, either you proactively make change, or anyways the government is going to come, right? Or the regulation is going to catch up on you. So I think that's the enabling thing that has happened. I still think that there are practices, or there are aspects of regulation that is not in sync with NCF. I think the biggest one that I find is very disabling for schools is the textbook mandate that many states have. Basically what they say is that all schools should be taking the state board published textbook. And just imagine like an entire population getting educated by one single textbook. I mean, how debilitating is that? And it is contrary to what NCF says, because NCF says that textbook is not the single source of learning. It is multimodal. And teachers and schools should actually use a variety of textbooks, and they should have autonomy in choosing. So the path actually should be for public schools to also have a choice, versus all public schools getting forced to use the state published textbooks, which is the practice in most developed nations, where the public school systems actually choose innovative curriculums and innovative textbooks. So I think that I would say is an example of of a regulation that is really hindering innovation for student learning.
Thank you very much, Smita. It's wonderful to hear about what works and what also comes in the way. I'm going to move to Ratna and ask you to comment on Smita's perspective. Ratna has explained to me that she was a very reluctant bureaucrat, but eventually she was very grateful for the learning that those first 20 years in the civil service gave her. She now brings that learning to her current mission to make learning joyful and meaningful in low-resource schools. Ratna, I know you've been working with the public school system. And how has your experience been working with the public school systems in the states of Gujarat, Haryana, Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya? You may want to comment on the textbooks as well.
So yes, to take off on Smita's point, I think yes. Now can you hear me? Yeah. So to take ahead Smita's point, yes, there is definitely a bit of, I would call it a tyranny of the textbook that exists today, whether it's public schools or private schools, for the simple reason you are regulated by a board. And the board more or less kind of, dictates the kind of books that you have access to. But having said that, I also think that, what really needs to be focused on is the fact that, yes, these textbooks are what they are, and the ICSE textbooks are very different, for instance, from the CBSE textbooks, and so on. But the fact remains, the engagement with the textbook that teachers have, and the engagement with learning that is finally passed on to the student, I think is key. And even with what we have, obviously we need to have the wherewithal and the flexibility to be able to use textbooks that are best suited to the purpose that we seek to drive. But having said that, even with the existing system, I think putting, and like you said, the NCF and, NEP 2020, there are a lot of very good things in all of them. But I think there's a need to understand that over the years, there's a system that has been built that is so embedded that even though the NEP 2020 talks about choice, talks about learning, things that you want to learn and not be driven by the existing structures, the fact remains to make that change, it's going to take a really long time, and it's because of all the players in the system. It is not, we keep talking about teachers.
Ratna, I want you to share what your experience has been in making the textbooks interactive. Because I know it's a problem, but you've done something which is very innovative. So why don't you share how you've made the textbooks interactive, with what activities?
So what we did was, so I went to a school where everything was focused on activity. It was what you call learning through curiosity. So we never had any expensive aids. We didn't have any expensive equipment. We played with mud. But what we did learn was hands-on. And so our thought was that with what already exists in a government school, the kind of books that exist, the kind of infrastructure that exists, and the kind of teachers that exist, how can we make a change without making large demands, saying, first, give me the infrastructure. So what we did was something quite simple. We focused on the fact that everybody likes learning interactively. So we took the existing CBSE textbooks. So I will talk about the state of Arunachal where we've done this. We took the existing CBSE textbooks. The first thing we did was we did a assessment of learning loss. And the way we did it was very simple. We gave the same problem in maths and English and language to a class 3 and a 5 and an 8th grade student. And that's how we worked out the learning gaps. Based on the fact that the way we worked out the learning gaps, we created activities subject-wise, grade-wise, in all the existing CBSE textbooks. Because government teachers do not like to do anything beyond their existing hours, plus they don't want to be burdened with extra activity. So the only way to do was work within that system. And that's what we did. So we put those activities in, and just to make sure, there are 3,000 schools in Arunachal, to make sure that these activities were rolled out in exactly the same way. Firstly, they were linked to learning outcomes, and then we wrote student worksheets, which were competency-based worksheets, like understanding based on competency. And then we wrote detailed teacher handbooks, so that that activity would be rolled out in exactly the same way across every one of those 3,000 schools. As a result, in that 18 months that and to be fair, the way people took to it was really, encouraging, because it involved truly in the sense of the word play. There were things for children to do, there were things for teachers to do, and there was no ambiguity because the activities were spelt out, and they were very specific, and they were linked to learning outcomes. The result of that, in 18 months, Anjali, we managed to bring up the performance of the 12th grade by 12% and the 10th grade by 10%, but not through rote learning, purely through competency-based learning. And the way we've done this is we've divided it up. So we have a FLN module, we have a middle school module, and we have something called an exams and beyond, which also focuses on skill, because a large part of the 9 to 12 population from government schools do a school to work transition. So it's really important for them to have that first level of orientation into the kind of jobs that are available in their ecosystem. Because our old learning has shown us that if you train people and send them out, they're likely to come back. So this
in Arunachal, the government supported you.
Oh, completely. So to be fair, because they let you in and they allowed you to be a part of the system, we actually use, people say, how did you get scale? Simple. The government machinery was what we used to drive scale, right? Government functionaries were part of the design, and the result of this is, because it's already embedded in the system, it's sustainable. So even if we exit, it stays.
And other governments have now approached you.
Meghalaya has asked us to come and do a very similar program.
So great. I think we should give Ratna a hand, because this is not an easy thing to do. But Ratna, one small question over here. This imposes a lot of emphasis on teachers, because they also have to be engaged. And I'm going to switch to Avantika, because Ratna has mentioned teachers specifically over here. Smita has mentioned it outside when we were talking. So I know that you are an investment banker during the day and a business school education strategy consultant by the week, and a business school professor by the weekend. And in both your roles, Avantika, you want to do whatever it takes to enable high value outcomes for students, teachers, parents, and the entire ecosystem. So you have mentioned that teaching is often undervalued as a profession. How can we make it more aspirational? How can we attract talent? And are there global regulatory models that India can learn from to improve teaching standards and encourage innovation?
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Anjali. Good afternoon, everyone. So Smita and Ratna have obviously set the scene for us in terms of what works, what doesn't, in terms of what is being taught, right? So what are the textbooks, what's the curriculum? Ratna has also touched upon the pedagogy, which is really how is it being taught. Let me touch upon the question that Anjali is posing to me, which is around who is doing the teaching, right? And in India, as I'm sure many of you are implicitly aware, even if you haven't really thought about it, teaching is not, unfortunately, right now, the most desirable profession, right? Whether you look at government school teachers or perhaps the private school teachers, the 3.5 million that Smita deals with from a children's standpoint, wanting to become a teacher is nobody's plan A right now, right? And again, I know I'm making a big statement, but a grade 3 teacher, which is where government school teachers start, we've done as Parthenon a lot of work on who writes these grade 3 teacher exams, and believe it or not, these are the same people who are writing a police sub-inspector exam, a block development officer exam, a patwari exam, and so on and so forth. Why? Because the curriculum or what is being tested in these exams is the same thing, which by definition means I'm hedging, right? I'm going to write 4 or 5 different government exams. The form is 100 rupees. It's social studies and general knowledge is being tested in all these exams. And therefore, whichever one I can crack, I will just join one of them, right? That is not plan A. That is not what quintessentially gurus were supposed to do, right? That's on the government system. The private is not very different. Again, if I can get a BPO, KPO, GCC, IT job, that's still my preferred option. All right, didn't get it, no worries, let me try a bank job. That's my next best option. Didn't get that either, let me become a school teacher, right? So across the spectrum in the 1.5 million schools that Smita is describing, if we take the premium, super premium schools out, if we take perhaps the majority of the mid-price schools, which are a handful still, there are millions of teachers in this country who didn't want to be teachers in the first place, right? Now that is a serious enough problem for us to be able to solve, right? Because there's only so much that, a good technology system in the school, a good textbook, a good style of, play-based, experiential-based learning can do if there is nobody to facilitate that learning. How can we encourage that, which is, the question you're asking me? I think, so look, again, as Parthenon, we do a lot of work globally, and there are definitely countries who are able to bring back the glory of being a teacher, bring back the importance of why should people want to become a teacher. I think, hands down, the first one is, as probably anyone's first guess would be, it is compensation. There are many, many, many scientific researches, many, many cross-country, cross-temporal researches that prove that, 10% increase in a teacher's salary increases student outcomes from 5 to 10%. So every time you increase teacher comp, it has a very real, very meaningful, very direct impact actually on math and English for sure, right? So that's one fact. And again, I'm sure some people in the room are thinking, oh, so the money is the answer. And here's why it's not the only part of the answer. It's one element of it. The other big thing that's missing, and again, both of them are probably, they see it a lot more up close than I do, but big part of the problem is also professional development and growth, right? If you think about career progression, all of us in our jobs here in this room, I'm sure we know what we need to do next to get to the next level, right? If we are a manager, want to become a director in the organization, what do we need to do to get to that delta? For better or for worse, teachers do not have that very clear career pathway, right? Certainly not in the kind of school, certainly not in, out of the 1.5 million schools, at least if I were to hazard a guess, 1.4 million school teachers do not know what am I supposed to do to get ahead, right? It's mostly tenure-based. You've stuck around for 3 years, you become this. You stuck around for 5 years, you've become that. It's all time-based. It's not, I think to what Smita was saying earlier, it's not based on quality. It's based on the amount of quantity of time you just spend in a system, right? So can we show a clear career pathway to teachers? And many countries, Anjali, are very good at this. So Germany, Switzerland, Singapore, Denmark, most of the Nordic, Scandinavian countries, most of them are really good at telling teachers that like any other professional in the room, you are also doing a professional job, which means there are expectations, there are rules, there are guidelines, there are KRAs, and here's how you get promoted. Unfortunately, in our system, predominantly that does not exist at the moment, right? So can we start to build that career path? Singapore, in fact, Anjali, again, and it's a very different comparison, we are a humongous country, but Singapore gives its teachers even career pathways, right? To say, once a teacher, always a teacher, continues to teach the same subject for the same grade over and over and over again is not the expectation. You can move into administrative roles, you can move into setting up newer schools, you can move into train-the-trainer roles. So an experienced teacher teaches other teachers, etc., right? So I think one, certainly compensation, two, building both professionally the teachers, but also giving them a career pathway. And then finally, I would say, a certain level of autonomy, and this could be controversial depending on who all are sitting in the room, but I think under the guise of innovative professionalism, somewhere we've forgotten that there's small percentage of teachers who do have the love for teaching, who did not take this as their plan D, right? They do want to solve every student's problem. But right now, a lot of our private schools, many of our government schools do not give teachers any of that autonomy because it is being thrust upon them that here is how you're supposed to teach, go into the classroom, read this part of the textbook, come back, that's your job. So those three things.
Thank you, Avantika. And I can see that Smita is dying to say something. Okay, Smita, go ahead.
No, I think Avantika raises a really good point. I would add to that stack of solutions, right? And in the spirit of talking solutions, I think one for sure is that we are dealing with a large population of teachers who've come for whatever reason they've come, and they're extremely unskilled, extremely unskilled. And, when you have to change a system and you want to do it at speed, because, to wait for the next generation of teachers to come, and, that's at least 2 generations of children gone out, still suffering from lack of skills. I would say, and this has been our experience of working with a large number of schools, is to basically, to change behaviors. Systems are very good interventions to change behaviors. I'll give a simple example. When email came, there was a certain way we used to communicate with each other. It changed dramatically when email came. It has changed dramatically ever since WhatsApp has come. I mean, I know I go back to my email once a day maybe. I'm mostly doing my work on WhatsApp, right? And systems have a way of changing behaviors. And what we've seen with our work also is that if you remove the crutch of a textbook, because we know that textbook-based learning can be very limiting, and instead equip the teacher with technology that gets her to execute every classroom in a really good manner, like, with exemplar lesson plans, that teacher, the same unskilled teacher, starts doing better. And by the way, she gets skilled very quickly. So the skilling that happens amongst teachers with technology tools, and especially, I would say, exemplar lesson plans, is far better than trainings. And in fact, there's a McKinsey report that talked about when teachers are given exemplar lesson plans by R&D people as compared to when they make their own lesson plans, they are far more effective. Student outcomes are better in the first case versus the latter. So I would think that is one big part of the solution. I think some of what Ratna spoke about was trying to do the same thing in a different context. And I would add one more. And the example, I think the mind-blowing example I had got to know about a few years back was how Finland transformed from having a very weak education system to being amongst the top. And the one big thing that they did was, which was apparently political suicide for the leader who took that call, was they completely overhauled their equivalent of a B.Ed program. They shut down all the mom and pop B.Ed store, sorry for the language, I call them shops, that's what they are in India, but the B.Ed so-called colleges, and they moved it to the top universities in the country. And, just imagine if all of your top universities are the ones who are running the teacher education program. It will be different. They will redefine how the entry happens, they will redefine the curriculum, and they will redefine what the exit is going to be. NCF is here, but unless the B.Ed program is changed, completely changed, there is no way NCF is ever fully coming to life. So I think that's the second big part of the solution which regulators or the government must do. And, I'm also sort of pitching for Ratna to take that forward, because there is only so much that all of us can do with teachers in service. We have to change, those guys who are now coming for the future.
So I really want to move to Jishnu, but I'm going to ask you, Ratna, to very briefly comment on this teacher point, and then I'll come to Jishnu. So very brief, Ratna.
Thank you. And really, that's a very important point, because what we see,
Close.
as far as even your NEP 2020, it says 50 hours of training per year for school heads, 50 hours of training for teachers. What training? Where? Why? What is it, linked to? Nothing. So now, the moment you have a blanket out there and you have this whole structured approach to curriculum, textbooks. I mean, government teachers don't even get to decide their own curriculum or their syllabus. So they're not enabled in a way that they should be if the love of teaching is really to come into this. And for those who really love teaching, it's like a blocker because they feel so discouraged with this.
So basically what you're saying is they need to have skin in the game.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
thank you. Thank you very much for raising that, both Smita and Ratna. Jishnu, with that, I'm going to move to you. With India's, Jishnu is a technology lawyer working with the technology, media and telecommunications practice at Trilegal. And he often works with edtech companies, helping them navigate legal complexities. It sounds very difficult. By identifying potential legal challenges and crafting robust strategies that balance innovation with regulatory requirements. It's a mouthful. He does a very difficult job. But so it's good to have you here. Jishnu, with India's evolving data privacy laws, how are they impacting the operations and accountability of edtech companies? What key challenges do these companies face in balancing innovation with regulatory compliance?
Thanks for that, Anjali. So, can everyone hear me? Yeah, so thanks for that, Anjali. So that's a good question, in fact. And while I was waiting for this panel to happen, I was speaking to one gentleman in the audience itself. So, and he was telling me how privacy and data protection is not the first things that edtech companies and startups think about when it comes to their compliance with the law. And it's always a product-first approach that's usually promoted or developed. But with the coming of the privacy regulations, and many of you would know of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 and the draft rules which are currently out for consultation, things are getting a little trickier out there in terms of what you have to comply with, what you have to do in terms of thinking about your product flow, etc. I'll just touch upon a few points in relation to that. So all of us use technology tools, as Smita mentioned, and technology tools sort of play a very important role moving forward with respect to education. And edtechs are the primary enablers of such education tools and technology tools. So firstly, I think what's happening is that the notice and consent-based regime that you currently saw is going to undergo a change. So it's getting more granular. So for processing various data points of your customers or of students, you will need to specifically sort of point out what exact data are you processing, and you will have to design your flow in a way that you take consent in an affirmative manner and keep logs of that specific consent. And that assumes importance given that there are also hefty penalties under the DPDP-A, which can go up to around 200 CR if not done properly, and obviously this depends on a case-to-case basis. But it's important to keep in mind while you design your products, you should design it in a compliant manner. The other significant issue that has sort of recently cropped up is again related to consent, but specifically in relation to children's data. So for children's data, the DPDPA ensures that you have to obtain verifiable parental consent. So now, there are questions regarding how do you go about obtaining a verified parental consent. The draft rules, which are out there in the public domain, and you can obviously, MeitY has opened consultation regarding those specific draft rules. You can have a look at those and put in your inputs as well, because it's likely to impact you in the future. So the draft rules basically mention that you have to have technological tools which in fact allow you to verify the age of the child and get a verifiable parental consent from the parent. So you'll also have to technically think about this and build it into your product flow. If you are catering to children, and if your product or the app that you run processes children's data. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Moving on, just one quick point. I think previously a lot of the apps I've seen and the startups that cater to specifically children, they do track a lot of children's behavior, and there's a lot of data generated from that. So there is a provision under the DPDPA which technically stops you from analyzing children's data. Educational institutions can do that. There's a specific exemptions under the Act which allow educational institutions to do it for educational activities. But edtech currently is not under the definition of educational institutions under the Act. That's how I read it.
Thanks for highlighting that. That's definitely a risk for some of the edtech companies. Thank you very much, Jishnu. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask each one of you to very briefly comment. We've been talking about existing regulations, but our education system is designed for the industrial age. We have a new future opening up in front of us. What steps can we take to transform the regulations so that they can create a model that equips students to thrive in this new future? So Avantika, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, I think just being open to using technology, right, is quite important. I think at the ecosystem level, we've not been able to really embrace technology. You know, in the examples that Smita was also giving, while she was talking, I could think of something like a Khanmigo, right, which is, in my mind, a great tutor, a great teaching assistant. It helps the teacher, it helps the student. Why is it that, you know, we are not able to really leverage something like that? So I think a regulatory environment that is more conducive to, or perhaps even nudges schools to start looking at something like a Khanmigo is probably a way to start.
Thanks, Avantika. Jishnu, very quickly.
So I think we need to sort of move away from the existing model, which is sort of the industrial age model, and being a product of the industrial age model where rote learning is preferred over rather a student-centric approach. I think we should put more focus on the students and their specific learning needs, and allow, and as Avantika mentioned, use the technology tools and use them to, for example, self-paced learning. So we can look at things like that, utilize AR, VR, making it more accessible to more people.
Thank you, Jishnu. Ratna, very quickly.
I think what we need to do is...
Closer.
What we need to do is change teacher mindset, particularly in the public school system. COVID made sure that a lot of teachers actually perforce had to learn how to use digital equipment, but it was not willingly. There needs to be a plan around it. And as part of the NEP and all the changes that it is foreseeing, I think this large ecosystem of more than 50% children whom these teachers are targeting, if you start with them and make sure that it's done in a manner that is acceptable and they're willing to embrace it rather than it being thrust on them, I think that would be useful.
That will make a difference. Smita, what regulations?
Yeah, I would say the regulators, at a population level, their role should be on anchoring everyone on the right outcomes and holding people accountable for outcomes and not meddling too much with inputs. And whenever we see that in any country, we see that it actually goes well, innovation is there. So I would say in that spirit, I would say it's really high time our board exams change. They are very rote-based. They come from the textbook. You can rattle any chapter and you can just go and regurgitate and you don't build any skill. That is the fundamental issue in our country. If we change our board examination, if the anchor changes, the entire school system will change. Because everyone is just preparing kids to get great marks in board exams. And if those board exams are testing for skills, automatically the whole system will change. So I think that is one big step that has to be taken. CBSE is, I think, the only board which has actually made good movement in that direction. but other boards have to come, and hence we have to be ready as a country to take PISA assessments, right? So I think that is one. And then the second one, which Avantika sort of hinted on earlier, was the moment you anchor on outcomes, then you've got to give autonomy to schools and educators and teachers to decide what is the best path to get there. That's where innovation in curriculum, pedagogy, a lot of change in practices that comes from deep research will come in, versus bureaucrats or MPs sitting in places and saying, teach this, teach from this textbook, teach what history is. I mean, come on, like that. We have to grow out of that as a country.
That's really a very good closing thing. It's really not about the teaching, it's about the learning. And I remember one of my friends who was at Google said, Anjali, why I don't understand. Schools are still behaving as if Google doesn't exist. So really the world has changed, and the more we can have connections, we can help our children make connections with themselves, with each other, with their inner world and the outside world. I think that can lay the path. But for that, our regulators also have to take that into account. With that, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Smita, Ratna, Jishnu, and Avantika for being with us today. And thank you, audience.